Now, most people, judging by the comments, people I've talked to, and just other content I've seen online, tend to prefer it when games include a wide variety of weapons for the player to experiment with. Weapons that might not be balanced well, there might be a meta within the game. However, the point is that there is variety to try because that makes people more interested. There's nothing wrong with enjoying something like this. I mean, it really does seem like the majority of people are hardwired this way. I'm a little different. Actually, the more I go out and I talk with people or just interact online, it doesn't matter if I'm in cyberspace or reality, I'm finding more and more that I am pretty fucking different from most people. So I don't really tend to enjoy games when they're like this. I see metas as a game balancing failure. I see the inclusion of a ton of weapons as more of a distraction from what the actual game should be. That's why I've always had these videos since pretty much the inception of this channel that go over the two balancing types that I tend to really enjoy most in the game. The first one would be what I like to call a level up system. Think of Fallout New Vegas. You start with one lever action, then you get the better lever action, then you get the best lever action. You level up in your stats, and you get better at the game by getting these better weapons. You can go up against the harder enemies that the game throws at you. There's a very good sense of pacing with this, and a lot of games kind of teeter towards this, but they don't go full on Fallout New Vegas. They might have like some other random weapons in there that kind of break up this sort of purity. But we're not here today to talk about level up sandboxes. What I want to talk about is what I like to call a single purpose sandbox. A single purpose sandbox is kind of the polar opposite of a level up system. You get one gun and that gun has a singular purpose. Maybe it matches up really well against a certain enemy. Maybe it's used to get rid of a roadblock that allows you to go to the next level. Whatever it is, you get better at the game by understanding this weapon's purpose and how it fits in with all of the other guns that all have their other singular purposes. You get better because you learn the game and the consistent rules that are presented within its sandbox. For me, this is what I enjoy the most, because this usually includes less overall weapons, but a greater focus on the actual gameplay loop and making these weapons the best they can be since there's nothing else to compete with or replace them in their given category. So today I want to talk about a couple different games that utilize single-purpose sandboxes, and I want to look at them specifically from the aspect of progression. Basically, what I want to be talking about is how single-purpose games handle pacing and how this means of balancing the sandbox that way actually contributes to a well-paced game. So I'm Bliskin, and let's get right on into it.
Hey, you're pretty good!
You're pretty good.
The first game we're going to be talking about is Metal Gear Solid 2, but not the entire game. We're not going to be talking about VR, we're not going to be talking about the plant chapter, specifically the tanker chapter. Now, I know a lot of you guys have been around for a while and have heard me talk about this, but as per usual, the channel has been growing and there's a ton of people that aren't too familiar when I say stuff like single purpose or level up. But here in the tanker chapter, unlike the plant chapter, the sandbox is a lot smaller. In terms of your weapons, you get chaff grenades, stun grenades, your USP, and your M9. This is the core tenets of what you're going to be using during stealth and combat. You start off the tanker mission with your M9, and the M9 is indisputably the best tool for stealth. You get to knock out your enemies so that when other enemies find them, they're not as freaked out and less likely to call an alert. You have great range on this thing, the laser sight makes it super accurate, and in most scenarios the M9 is just kind of the de facto choice. You'll be able to find chaff grenades that can jam up enemy comms or take out cameras. Stun grenades are really useful for when you get caught and need to get rid of a group of enemies very quickly. It's actually one of the big game strats. To take a stun grenade and just charge into a crowd of assault troopers, have them knock you down, tank that damage, and then have the stun grenade go off while they're all surrounding you while you're on the ground. However, you'll find as you're going throughout the tanker, if you try to go to the bottom of it first, there's going to be this section that's blocked off by a bunch of Semtex bomb traps. Now here, you can't damage them with your M9. You can't use any of the grenades either. You need a weapon that fires real bullets in order to get through this thing. And the way Metal Gear Solid 2 has you do this is going all the way to the top of the ship and fighting a boss to get this weapon. So when you get this tool, not only is it a really good feeling to finally go into that area that's been blocked off, but it's also a major power step up. Because after you beat this boss, now if you get caught, you can take out one of the guys really quickly before they radio in. You might be able to take out one assault trooper. You get enough firepower to get yourself out of a sticky situation. It's not enough where you could fight everybody on the ship, but you definitely feel a lot stronger and a lot bolder. So the way that you unlock this through the boss fight, the way that it unlocks areas of the ship that you previously couldn't go to, and the way that you just get so many more combat options really bolsters the pacing of the tanker chapter. And without a single purpose sandbox, I don't think it would have felt as good. Like imagine you're going through the tanker and you get this USP from the boss fight, but then immediately after you get an assault rifle. Or let's say you could just pick up one of the enemy AKs from the start. You wouldn't have that clear pacing or sense of accomplishment. And in turn, the tanker chapter wouldn't feel as good. But the tanker is just a single chapter of a game. Is there a game that has the entire sandbox balanced as single purpose? Why, yes there is, and longtime viewers are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Halo 1 Combat Evolved is really cool because the entire game is based around a single purpose sandbox. Like, the entire gameplay loop is centered around being single purpose. The enemies, your weapons, your power-ups, everything in the game has a clear-cut reason for being there, and there is nothing that feels superfluous or overwrites everything else in the sandbox. Now with the game's multiplayer, you do get that meta with the pistol. However, right now I want to focus in on campaign, where every weapon is tailored and balanced in my eyes perfectly. Now the way Combat Evolved does this to help with pacing and forward progression is by introducing weapons in specific missions that are kind of catered to them. My favorite example of this would be the sniper rifle in the mission Truth and Reconciliation. While this wasn't the first time that you got your hands on the sniper rifle, it was the first time that you were introduced to its night vision function, to the fact that you can use this thing at a distance and remain undetected, and just generally get a feel for how you can use this in closer quarters environments. Many people say the best part of Truth and Reconciliation is the starter area before you enter the ship. And a large part of that has to do, at least I think, with the fact that this area is perfectly made for experimenting with the sniper rifle and everything that it's capable of. Couple in together that this area also shows you the weaknesses of the sniper, therefore showing you the strengths of other weapons in the sandbox to make up for that weakness, is really good game design. You'll also notice this is the only mission in the game where you don't have access to the DMR type pistol. Now in most missions, the pistol kind of takes that longer range role, and while it doesn't supersede the sniper for ranges or for stealth like at all, having you not have the pistol in this mission and instead having to focus on the sniper rifle solely for that role not only makes you appreciate and understand the pistol better when you get it back, but it really helps differentiate the sniper and the pistol from each other. Halo Combat Evolved does this all the way through, introducing different weapons and different missions in ways that really gets you to experiment with all the enemies in the sandbox, with the level design, and again, you get better as you start to understand the singular purpose of all these different things you're experimenting with. It's a big reason as to why Halo Combat Evolved is my most favorite game of all time. Last last year I was talking about the Resident Evil remake, and I talked about how it took a proof of concept game and made it an actual full-fledged gaming experience. I think I was too hard on the original Resident Evil, because I just finished playing through the Jill campaign, and I realized on display here was a sandbox and pacing much better than the remake, specifically because it was single purpose. So in the remake, you basically have the shotgun that you can get, but then you can go through a series of events to get a better shotgun. You can get a Magnum, but then you can also get this Super Derringer that does crazy amounts of damage that kind of acts like a one-shot Super Magnum. While the game still for the most part retains a whole single-purpose design, it introduces those kind of weird level up elements, and while this doesn't make the remake a bad game, not by a long shot, it does kind of detract from this kind of purity I was talking about at the beginning. You see, Resident Evil 1996, for me at least, with its sandbox, is paced a lot better, specifically because it's single purpose. You see, you start the game off with nothing but your knife and your pistol. The knife being something you need an incredible amount of skill to be able to use, but rewards you with not having to expend ammo. The pistol is a much safer bet, but uses a lot of ammunition to take down a single enemy. That being said, you do get a lot of ammunition for your Beretta. This means that even as you unlock other weapons, the Beretta retains its purpose of just an old, reliable type of gun that even though it's not the best at anything, it's something that you know that you'll probably always have ammunition for. When you unlock the pump action shotgun, you go through the mansion and all of a sudden you have a very competent tool for clearing out the normal zombies and dogs that you find in the earlier game. The grenade launcher starts off as a boss fight weapon, but as you progress throughout the game, you start realizing that it's better used against unique enemies with its specialty rounds. The best example of this is how well acid rounds work on hunter betas. Then of course, you get the Magnum, which becomes your new boss fight weapon. So you get that sense of pacing because as you unlock different weapons, the role of prior weapons changes. So nothing really gets invalidated, there is no level up. That grenade launcher is still as powerful as it ever was. However, it gets recontextualized as you continue going throughout the game and the Magnum is introduced. And I think this is really cool. It's a very kind of nothing gets left behind approach, and no matter what stage you're in during your playthrough of Resident Evil 1996, every single weapon still retains its unique, singular purpose. Now, before we start talking about the last game that I want to bring up, I want to go back to these games that just kind of include a shit ton of weapons for the sake of them being there or for the sake of, the game being more fun. And when people say that, I kind of think of like a baby that needs to have like keys jingled in front of their face in order to pay attention. It's like, okay, here you are, here's the game, look, there's another gun to unlock here, oh look, another random gun you can find, oh look, a new update adding new content. Like, I'm weird, I get that, but I'm under the belief that a good game should come with what it comes with, and that should be fun, like, maybe not endlessly fun, but you should get consistent fun going back to it. Think about it like a board game. If you're playing something like Monopoly every once in a while, it's not like you're gonna stop enjoying Monopoly because you played it 5 years ago. You'll be able to whip it out again after a little while and enjoy it for what it is, because it's designed in a specific way that's very thoughtful, mapped out. There is a very well catered and paced experience there. But then when you have games like Resident Evil 4, The Last of Us, or Metal Gear Solid 4, it really does start to feel like that kind of keys jingling in front of a baby. Now, Resident Evil 4 is probably the better alternative in this sense because it's still a really well-made game. However, in the original, you have all of these choices with pistols, but the Red 9 is such an easy de facto choice just because of its fire rate, damage, accuracy. This thing can rival snipers in the later game once you get the stock. Its damage rivals shotguns and rifles. Like, this is just easily the best gun in the game. So yeah, you might experiment with other guns, but as the game gets more difficult or you're in a pinch, guess what? You're gonna bring out the old reliable. The Resident Evil 4 remake has pay-to-win weapons that are better than anything else in the sandbox. So yeah, while I definitely enjoy these games, the whole idea that there is something better kind of invalidates a lot of the other choices. And then Resident Evil 4 Remake having those pay-to-win weapons is just kind of icky. With The Last of Us, I really hate this game sandbox because you find new weapons as you go through the campaign. And it does this really annoying thing where there's almost always two weapons that do the exact same thing. One of them goes into your pistol slot and one of them goes into your long arm slot. It could be the two shotguns, the rifle, and the Magnum revolver. Like, there's just so much there that just feels like wasted space. That just feels like, okay, we need to give the player something else to upgrade. We need to give the player something else to find in the world. And I think through a single-purpose sandbox design, Last of Us could have been paced a lot better when it comes to its actual gameplay loop and weapon sandbox. If you're interested in hearing me talk about The Last of Us' sandbox and how to improve it, let me know down in the comments below. But perhaps the most egregious example is Metal Gear Solid 4. Like, Metal Gear Solid 4 has, I think it's like around 50 weapons or something like that, but there's only like 4 that are worth using. Let's just look at the assault rifle category right now, okay? This clip that I took by accident almost, like I wasn't trying to prove a point. Like I made this clip years ago when I didn't even have the thoughts for this video. But let's just take a look here at the difference between firing the AN-94 and the XM8. Now this is gameplay. No, but like all jokes aside, despite the fact that all these guns kind of like feel the same, despite being very well modeled, sound design, like from an aesthetic standpoint, MGS4 is kind of peak when it comes to its firearms. But when it comes to balancing, it's like, am I going to use the XM8 or the AN-94 when my back is up against the wall? Or am I just going to use them for shits and giggles, and the second something goes wrong or the second the game gets a lot harder, I'm probably going to just whip out the DMR assault rifle suppressed shotgun grenade launcher hybrid supergun that is the M4 in game. So yeah, I hope I'm bringing my point across with the whole idea that like having this many guns in the game can kind of destroy the pacing if you just find the optimal choice, and then everything else you find throughout the game just kind of loses its value because of it. That's why I say having a meta in your game is kind of a failure when it comes to balancing. But getting back to single purpose and pacing, I want to talk about a game that actually released pretty recently. This is the Silent Hill 2 remake. It has a very simple single-purpose sandbox. A melee weapon that, while there are 2 of them, it doesn't really count as a level up because they're both statistically the same, it's just an aesthetic change. You get a pistol that's really good for shooting enemies in the leg, which opens them up for a melee attack. You get a shotgun that's really good to save for when you're swarmed by enemies and need to take one out very quickly. And then towards the end of the game, you get the rifle, which works very good against boss fights or for headshotting certain enemies at a distance to thin out a crowd. Each and every one of these guns retains their singular purpose no matter what you unlock. The shotgun is still ideal for close range enemies, even when you get the rifle. The pistol is still apex when it comes to shooting enemies in the leg and working in tandem with your melee. And there is nothing that quite compares to the rifle in terms of its boss fight damage. When you unlock each of these guns, it feels like you're getting better and more equipped to handle the horrors that the game is going to start throwing at you harder and harder as you go through. There's a very nice sense of pacing you get as you get stronger, along with the enemies who get a lot more intense. I bring up the Silent Hill 2 remake, one, because it's just a fantastic game that, believe me, we are going to be talking a lot about this year, and two, because it's nice to see in 2024, now in 2025, a newer game that recently released utilize a single-purpose sandbox, showcase how it affects the pacing of the overall game, and show that this can still be done. It's not just older games like Halo and Metal Gear Solid 2 and Resident Evil 1 that do single-purpose sandboxes. This is something that's still very applicable to today. So even though Silent Hill 2 is a remake, a pure single-purpose sandbox still works well and feels really good. Even the enemy design, like Halo, is very single-purpose. You get very used to the behaviors of certain enemies that are going to ambush you, enemies that are going to attack you from range, enemies that are going to get up close. You start realizing when it's an appropriate situation for the shotgun as the tension ramps up. You start realizing when it's better to expend more pistol ammunition to not risk getting into close range combat. It's a really well made game, and the fact that it has a single purpose sandbox is a very big part of this. The 4 games that I just brought up are what I call pure single-purpose sandboxes. There have been games that follow kind of the single-purpose model, but deviate a little bit. It's like the same way Resident Evil 8 is a level-up system, but then has some elements that aren't really level-up. Resident Evil 3 Remake is single-purpose, almost perfectly. But then the game kind of ruins this when it has its burst fire Glock featured towards the end of the game. I imagine they put this in here because they think, oh, if you haven't leveled up your normal Glock 19 with the different upgrades that you can find throughout the world, you're kind of going to be at a disadvantage. So let's put this here for players that weren't exploring as much, so they still have a little bit of extra firepower towards the end. But guess what? If you have your stock Glock from the beginning and you swap it out for the burst fire Glock towards the end of the game, that's a level up. So even though the single purpose design is really there in force in a game like Resident Evil 3 Remake, because you have elements like that burst Glock, it's not what I like to call a pure single purpose sandbox. And again, that's what made these last couple of games really special. Metal Gear Solid 2, specifically the tanker, Halo 1 Combat Evolved, Resident Evil 1996, and Silent Hill 2 Remake are all pure single-purpose games. This is of course excluding bonus weapons you can get on replays, but I'm talking about the core experience in your first playthrough. But what do you guys think? Are there any other single-purpose games that you like that I haven't really talked about that you would want to bring up in the comments? Please do. Do you prefer level-up systems, or do you have a unique perspective on a game like Metal Gear Solid 4, Resident Evil 4, or The Last of Us? I know there's a good chunk of you that probably do. By all means, even if I don't agree with it, throw it down in the comments. It's always fun to see the little discussions down there. Anyways, this is Pliskin Boy. Channel's been around for 6 years now, guys. This is pretty crazy. So I figured a video like this for people that are just joining in now will help them get up to speed with a lot of the terminology I use when evaluating a game sandbox. Anyways, this has been Pliskin, over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.